Welcome back to West Texas View.
We're so pleased to have Carol Cain here today. She is our resident expert about the WASP, the Women Air Service Patrol, the first military pilots in America. And so you had started the story about how they were conceived, and then the word went out, and over 30,000 people applied, but they couldn't take that many. They were all going to be trained in this little airfield at Sweetwater, and so out of that, then we got about
a little less than 2,000.
Yeah,
a little less than 2,000 were accepted into the program. Of those 2,000 women, 1,074 graduated at Sweetwater, but 24 graduated in Houston, where the program started. And then the program was in existence in Houston for about 8 months, and 24 women graduated there. And those were, most of those women were the women that had been in Europe with Jacqueline Cochran. And they moved the program to Sweetwater. It was not called Avenger Field at the time. It was Aviation Enterprises. And the facility had been built by private. It was a private facility leased to the Air Force. It was called the Army Air Force then. Leased to the Army Air Force, and they were training British pilots who were coming into the United States through Canada with Canadian volunteers. They were teaching these men how to fly, then they were going back and joining the RAF. In 1943, they moved the WASP from Houston to Avenger Field 70 years ago. It's amazing. This year at homecoming, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of the WASP coming to Sweetwater. And
17 WASP were
17 surviving WASP came back to Avenger Field to see and experience the weather, the wind, the dust, and just relive those wonderful months that they were in Sweetwater. The training process lasted about 6 months.
But each time we have a reunion, every time we have the yearly homecoming, we have stories from those WASP that come back. And one of my favorites is that she rode the bus in, got off of the bus, another one rode the train in, they got off the train, and they waited because they were told transportation would come to pick them up, and it was a cattle car. So they rode standing up with their little white gloves and their little suits, standing up in the back of a cattle trailer as they were hauled out.
That was their transportation. And you know what amazes me is that when those women came on the train, they got off of the train, either a little sleepy cab driver would pick them up and take them to the Bluebonnet Hotel. Then they would be transported to Avenger Field. Today, the train does not run. The passenger train doesn't run through Sweetwater anymore. The depot is no longer there. The Bluebonnet Hotel is no longer there, and there certainly are no sleepy cab drivers anymore in small towns. But the Avenger Field survives. It is there, and planes land on the runways that these women trained on every single day.
In fact, we have planes. The museum has planes.
Yes. Oh, goodness, yes.
Well, another one of the funny stories is one of the WASP had her own plane because she was a daredevil and barnstormed across the country doing shows for money. And so she flew her own plane, and they confiscated it for the war effort because they
didn't give it back when she finished
needed
training.
Planes so bad. So it was worn out probably by the time the war was over, and guess what happened? She had to hitchhike home.
They did.
About 20 states over.
They had to arrange their own transportation to Avenger Field, and then when the program closed at the end, they had most of them had been assigned duty bases all over the United States. They had to arrange their own transportation home or catch a flight on an Air Force plane if it happened to be going even close.
And because there was so much opposition to this, politically. One of the things that's the saddest thing of all to me is if they were killed on duty, their family had to either arrange and pay for getting them back home and their funeral, or their body was just buried wherever they died.
Or the WASP took up a collection to have the body sent home. The WASP program was not a military program. It was part of the civil service. The women came, they had to have a pilot's license to even apply for the program, but they came to Avenger Field to learn to fly the Army or the military way.
Right.
They came to train in military aircraft because they had been flying smaller civilian
And
aircraft.
they loved
And
flying.
they loved it. They loved the fast
And
planes.
they wanted to be a part of the war effort.
All of these women had two things in common. First of all, their love of aviation, and second was their sense of country and their patriotism. They came because they knew they were needed. They came to free male pilots, to be able to go overseas, to be able to do other things, to help the war effort. And the WASP never flew outside of the United States. They never flew in combat. But they did everything else that male pilots did within the confines of the United States.
And tell about, they even flew the target planes that the people shot
For live gunnery practice, yes.
So if they were off target just a little bit, that pilot might have been shot.
Exactly. They towed targets for both gunnery practice from the ground up and gunnery practice plane to plane. So they would be up there towing a cloth target behind their little plane, and airplanes, fighters would be flying around them shooting at this target that they were.
And one of my favorite stories is that they, when a plane was damaged in the war, because we were so desperate for planes, and they would bring it back and repair it, and then they'd send a woman pilot up to see if it would fly.
They were test pilots. That's
before they let the men fly.
That's one of the things they would do. They were used as instructors. They were used as test pilots. They were used as tow target. They towed targets. They did and ferried planes.
And took mail.
And they did everything. If a general or an officer needed to be transported from place to place, these women were the ones that were the crews for his plane.
And eventually they became instructors, and they were teaching the men how to fly these planes.
They did, and that was part of their role when they would be dispersed to these other bases as instructors, right.
Because we had one little bitty WASP about this tall who was talking about that she was teaching a man to fly a plane, and he kept not knowing what was going on, and she just bawled him out, and then they later got married.
That happened a lot. There were a lot of WASPs.
We're going to have to take a break right now. We'll be back in just a minute. Join us because we've got lots more to tell you. See you in just a minute.
Stay tuned. West Texas View will be right back.